It had been a while since I had been at my home, nearly a month, and in that time I'd researched so much. I had looked into every possible reason to the nightmares I'd been suffering from, until it clicked. It happened the last night at my house. I had taken a simple glance at a paper, and the answer was there, in front of me the entire time. It went back to when the elements of harmony first found each other, when they were formed, and the nightmare was banished from Princess Luna. I began to think, make up many theories. My thoughts began to align. The depths of my mind. Somehow, she had survived something so terrible and made it through. However, there was something that boiled in my mind. I wondered, what if there were fragments of the nightmare that still existed? What if it had managed to survive the main six? What if I had managed to get infected with one of the fragments? What if it was something else entirely? What if they were banished back into the toils of the mind, waiting and praying for another victim to fall into its clutches? Had I fallen into its clutches itself? Had I fallen prey? It was the only reason, the only real answer I had to go on. I'd been having nightmares, and it was my only explanation. Right now, I was on the edge of Ponyville, in a motel, thinking, planning, and wondering. I didn't know what I was going to be up against. I knew it was bigger than me. I knew that if I wasn't prepared, I would die. I'd be taken under, and the nightmares would have a second chance. This darkness was like a plague. It plagued in the deep depths of the mind itself, and controlled those, making them simple husk, puppets for its own devices. I knew that the darkness took Luna, used her in order to create the night forever, because that's what it thrives on. It thrives in the darkness. There was so much of me that wanted to run away from it, that wanted it. But I knew eventually I would succumb to the darkness. I would either fall into its depths, fall into insanity, or I'd probably take my own life. None of which sound very appealing. I was sitting at a desk in the motel. It was a simple brown desk, very few items on it from my home I took with me. There was a simple picture of the forest. It was unsettling, but peaceful at the same time. The floorboards beneath me were rather creaky. Looking around the interior of the room, the floorboards, oddly enough, were blue. No idea why, but they were. The wood was brown, and the ceiling itself was just white. There was a simple bed in the corner, a blue blanket, and a few pillows. There were very few notable things, a few pictures, but that was it. There wasn't much else, aside from a bookshelf and a small reading chair. I thought about all of my options. One of the main six, a librarian named Twilight, could possibly help me. I would need to learn whatever, anything really anything at all I could possibly learn to fight against this nightmare, fight against the darkness. I knew it was not just a manifestation of the mind. It had to be real. I knew it was real. I knew I needed to fight it before I fell underneath. I ran my talons through my feathers, groaning. There was so much at stake. There was so much to lose, in all honesty. I would honestly rather throw someone else in my situation. There were a few things I needed to do if I was going to pursue this. First thing, I'd probably need to head to the library, but I immediately crossed that off my list. I knew if I went to Twilight asking for these things, she'd probably get suspicious. I mean, who wouldn't? Sure, I could try to think of something to say that might limit the suspiciousness, but I don't want to draw attention. I just want to get in and get out. I took a breath. I knew I would need supplies for the trip and the journey. That was somewhat of a smart idea. I knew I'd have to venture forth into the Everfree. I knew I'd have to get to the castle where it all started. Maybe I'd find some clues, or maybe I'd find evidence or anything to the nightmare. If there were fragments, if there was some search, some chance I could trace anything. I took a few breaths to steady myself. I walked over to the motel door, sitting there thinking. I shook my head, turned, and grabbed my coat. At the moment, I was wearing a simple worker's belt. The belt was there for a few reasons. It was so I could grab whatever I needed easily. There were a few things I'd brought with me. A flashlight, some glow sticks, and a few flares. People thought I was weird for carrying them around, but after certain things, I could never be too careful. I was wearing a white shirt and a simple yellowish-brown jacket that I had mentioned. It had two hoodie pockets, ones where I could stick my talons in. With everything else in order, I walked outside. The bright sun was beating down on my eyes. I had to close my eyes all the way to protect myself from the assault. I'd stayed inside the motel room for days. Well, just 2 days, not to over-exaggerate. I'd just been sitting there thinking and planning, trying to get a decent grasp on what the fuck I was going to do. I shook my head, adjusted my eyes to the brightness, and walked forward. I went down the road, going deeper into the depths of the town. It all seemed nice. It seemed inviting. Around me it was filled with bright colors that were welcoming, that were nice to the eye. I tried to push the paranoia out of my head, telling myself that all of this goodness around me, with some faith, I'd find myself somewhere better. That all of this would be like this forever. I wouldn't have to worry about anything. But I knew these were all empty. I knew eventually I'd find myself somewhere very unpleasant. I tried to keep my head half filled with optimism. And I have to be real. I was telling myself I was going to be okay, but I had to remain cautious. I couldn't trust anyone. I had to keep a level head, and I had to keep my guard up. I knew if I let my guard down for even a second, I'd pay the price. The village seemed friendly enough. Warm smiles plastered on the faces of everyone and everything. It was one of those towns where everybody knew everybody. It was a nice, quaint little community. I looked around and asked one of the residents if they knew where the general store was. I got pointed in the right direction. I craned and bent my neck, popping it, walking off in that direction. I'd stepped inside the quaint little general store. Looking around, I turned, seeing everything that lined the shelves. There were many things there. There was food, there was water, there was camping equipment, and there was even knives. Upon seeing the knives, I felt my mind begin to twist ever so slightly. My eyes growing wilder, my heart beating a little faster. I felt the violent stab of visions. It clouded my mind. The darkness, the nightmares, they swarmed around me like sharks around a bleeding hunk of meat. As my heart beat faster and faster, I held my talons to my head. My mind was no longer the still waters of a lake, but now the violent waves of an ocean. I closed my eyes, taking deep, steadying breaths. It took a lot of willpower to calm myself down, but I was able to get rid of the shots. I was able to get rid of all of it from my head, my mind. I was able to regain control. I didn't focus on any details of my surroundings. I just focused on the general store, focused on what I needed. I couldn't focus on anyone, not with the way my mind was racing. I didn't even really focus on the interior. I just started grabbing items, things I would need. Batteries, additional flares, more food. I would need them for the trip ahead. I also grabbed an emergency first aid kit. It was filled with all the essentials I would need. I also went and grabbed a knife. I didn't feel as if it was enough, so I grabbed a second pocket knife, just to be sure and safe. I walked out and began walking down the streets after gathering the things I needed. I'd left my cozy little home all the way back in the Griffin Kingdom to walk down the road in Ponyville. I couldn't help but glance over to the forest. I felt something calling to me. It bit my nerves. My mind was full of static. I was practically railing, trying to process what I could possibly be thinking of. What would happen? I decided that maybe I should make a fallback plan. I ran over to the post office. I wrote a quick letter, paid the bits needed for it, and sent it off. This was a fallback plan. I didn't really want to get anyone involved, but I had to do this. The letter was addressed specifically to Princess Luna. I write to you out of desperation. My mind is no longer my own. My dreams are plagued with nightmares. I can feel them slowly creeping in on me, wrapping around me and choking at what little life I have left. And even in the day where I am awake, my mind becomes fragile. I cannot hope to withstand the assault of the dark thoughts. I am concerned and I am beaten down by the very adversary I fight against. So I write to you in hope of my wearing mind. Sincerely, Dawn. I decided to use an old name. A name I'd have to go by now. Maybe it would help the pain a little more. After I was done with my business at the post office, I thought about everything else. If I should go to the library. But then I didn't really want to burn any more daylight than I had to, than was necessary. So I went off. I'd been walking for hours, well, for a few hours, in the foliage of the forest. It was vast and thick, my surroundings. It was blinding. How much there was clumped up, how many vines. How many were just there, blocking me. The vines and the bushes surrounding me on the path ahead. It was a straight line, like a barrier, a tunnel, leading me to an inevitable death. There was no escape. It was a straight shot. My mind ached once again, pushing away all of it. There was a lot of doubt. I doubted my ability to navigate this vast forest. I doubted my own survival. I thought of myself as an idiot for coming this far. But I saw the fruits of my labor. A castle in the distance, decrepit and old, broken and long forgotten. I didn't settle my mind on it too long as I took a breath and stepped inside. I'd been searching for hours, and I hadn't found anything. I took a breath. I was in the interior. I had a fire lit, and I could see everything around me a bit better. The stones around me were cracked and worn out. There were holes in the walls, the floor, and the ceiling. The paintings, the rugs, were worn from the elements. The only reassurance and comfort I had was the fire in front of me and the knife I had tucked away. I was tired, unusually tired of my mind. It was filled, my thoughts swimming in the ocean. It was as if my mind was its own ocean. However, it was crashing against itself. Even thinking that made my headache spur. Maybe I just worn myself out. Maybe I was just thinking too much. Maybe it was something else, but I can tell you one thing. That day I made the biggest mistake. I fell asleep. When I woke up, I didn't have a splitting headache. The only thing I could feel was a gentle breeze, rocking ever so slightly against my body. I got up, groaning at the effort. I didn't even have to open my eyes or look around, but I felt something. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, but it was the strongest it had ever been. When I looked around the site, I was shocked, surprised, and driven into a stupor. I was on a floating island in the middle of a black void. I didn't even know how I got there. Maybe this was a dream. There were multiple other islands surrounding mine. Some were close, some were more distant. The closest island was Ponyville. I looked at my island. It was not the castle. I was confused. It had a road shooting right down the middle of it. To my left, there were a few trees, a small pond, and a shack. To my right, there was a train track that eventually led off the side. It was broken off. The only glimpse I could see that was deeper was into the abyss of the void. I felt fear. Genuine fear gripped my heart. I felt confusion. This time, the nightmare was more distorted and more wild than it had ever been before. But the only thing that set me on edge the most, I felt like I was being watched. Something was lurking in the void itself, waiting for me to lower my guard, and I knew that if I died in my dream, I'd die in real life. Somehow I just knew. I didn't know how, but I knew. The only thing I could do was muster up what little courage I had left and press on. The sight of the abyss was unnerving to me. The landscapes were wild and crazy. I could feel my energy pulsing. I could feel the energy of the void pulsing, like it had its own heartbeat. Didn't know how, but I could. I had a hard time telling whether or not it was a reality, or just a dream. I could feel a gentle breeze again brush against me. It only served to push me deeper on edge. I turned and looked at the shack. Knowing there wasn't much else to go on, I took a deep breath and crept forward slowly. The shack was old and run down. It had a few boards missing in it, and it seemed like the door was very rusted. I went to grab the knob, but the knob just ripped right off. However, I could now access the door. I opened it slowly and looked inside. It was like any other tool shed. There was an assortment of different tools. However, most of them were worn, rusted, and faded. However, there was one thing that caught my attention. A shovel. I looked closer, intrigued by it. The blade of the shovel seems to have been sharpened, making it slightly deadlier. And it seems that the handle of the shovel, I picked it up and noted that for some reason, whatever was wrapped around it made it easier to grip, made my grip stronger. Maybe this would come in handy. Didn't know how or why or when, but maybe it would. I took it and put it in my pack. I walked out and searched high and low. There wasn't really anything left in the shack worth of noting or taking. I stepped out, stared back to the void. I still felt like something else was staring back at me. I was nerved, my nerves driven on edge. I didn't know where to start, how far I needed to go, or there was an objective at all. I thought very carefully about things. Maybe I need to head back home to my house. Maybe it was here. Maybe I would find the answers in Griffinstone, or maybe Ponyville. I decided the safest bet, or at least the easiest one, would be Ponyville, as it was closer. I prepared my wings, thrusting them downward, shooting myself high into the colorless sky. I prepared myself forward, shooting through the air. It hadn't taken very long, just a few minutes, but I made it to Ponyville. I looked all around. Something was very wrong. That was already obvious from the start. It was as if Ponyville hadn't existed at all. Like, it wasn't real, but it was at the same time. The very thought made my head thump. Everything around me was gray. The town wasn't colorful, even slightly cheerful. It had been abandoned for anything that seemed remotely friendly. It only seemed to push my guard further, making me suspect that there was an ambush at every corner. As I walked alone in barren streets, I didn't even know where to look, where to begin, in Ponyville itself. Before I could think too much on it, I heard a rustling sound. I turned quickly, my senses exploding, going overboard. Every single sense of survival kicked in at that moment. I decided to investigate. There wasn't much to go on. There wasn't really anywhere to go. I noted that there was a round sugar cube corner in the alleyway to the right of it. I stepped forward. The alleyway was eerie, abandoned. For some reason I'd missed the ponies, their blissful happiness. Now it's been replaced by the emptiness of the void, the barrenness. I stepped deeper inside Sugar Cube Corner, came into the kitchen, deciding that maybe the alleyway wasn't the best way to get inside. I came deeper into the kitchen and very, very cautiously turned the corner, peeking my head. I didn't expect to see a small earth pony filly. I still kept my guard up. I didn't want to let it down for a second. I then called out, "Hey!" She turned, stared at me with this fear and frailty. She looked practically hungry, starved. She ever so gently backed away, as if the intent was for me not to notice, but I did, so she could run at a moment's notice. I don't know what compelled me, but I gently knelt down, lowering myself to her level, and said, "It's okay. You don't have to worry." I backed up slightly to give her more room, to make her more comfortable. "My name's Dawn. What's your name?" She seemed hesitant at first, but she seemed happy nevertheless to talk to someone. "My name's Cozy Cure." I looked at her flank. She had a cutie mark of a glowing roll of bandages. I reached into my bag, and she seemed to tense ever so slightly, but I continued. I pulled out a large roll of bread and pushed it over to her, along with a bottle of water. Surprisingly, in an instant, she snatched them away, scarfing down the bread and chugging nearly half the bottle. I was surprised, but nevertheless, "Easy there, Cozy," I said. I turned and looked up. Going over to the window and staring out at the sky, my senses were on overload. The air, it's not right. It was wrong. It was worse than before. I smelled something foul in the air. It smelled like blood. Something was out here with us. I could tell. It was hunting. Before anything could happen, I grabbed Cozy. I went out the back door of Sugar Cube Corner. I could tell it was coming inside. We were moving around, going down the alleyway. I could then hear it leave Sugar Cube. I could hear it leave Sugar Cube Corner. I could hear the sound of something dragging along dirt road. I couldn't quite make it out, but it was the sound of metal dragging over dirt and rock. It was disorienting, unsettling to hear that sound, but not being able to see what it was. And frankly, I didn't give a shit what it was. I wanted to get out of there. Moving down the twisted corridor that made up the alleyways, I was moving slowly and carefully, as if not to reveal our position, not to make any sound. Eventually I found a back door in one of the houses. I moved inside very carefully, opening the door slowly. Once inside, I kept Cozy near me at all times, securing the entire house. I searched the entire first floor with her by my side, and the second floor. As a precaution, I went to every window and drew the shades, blocking any line of light from the outside, any line of sight that could be had on us. I then went downstairs and barricaded the doors. I know. I took a deep breath and took my time after going back upstairs with Cozy. I then admired the decor of the house. The wallpaper was ripped and was tearing off in quite a few places. It was quiet. I took a deep breath. Again. The room was void of anything remotely colorful. The wall also had many, many posters on it, and pages. I stared at them, glancing at them periodically. There were many words and scribbles on the papers. Scribbles of a madman, a survivor, someone on the brink of insanity. I shook my head, getting a start. I went through my bag, checking over my equipment. The bed didn't seem too bad. There was a small layer of dust on top of it, and a few minor rips in the blanket. I could tell Cozy was tired, as she laid on the bed and almost instantly fell asleep. I decided to take another safety measure. I went over and began picking up glasses, setting them on the stairs, and tying small strings to each glass, so if anything moved up them, they would fall and shatter, and we'd be alerted immediately. I went and barricaded the bedroom door. We were safe. There was an alarm system. This was almost like a safe room. She was sleeping on the bed. I decided I needed rest too. I'm now completely convinced this is a reality, an alternate dimension somewhere. It was real. Whatever it was, I wasn't dreaming. I laid there unconscious, my body giving into the miracles of slumber, the divine blessing of the healing sensation of it. However, it was all short-lived. Upon me waking up, I heard a shattering sound downstairs. I didn't know how I didn't hear the thing move, or whatever it was. The only thing I needed to know was the glass was shattering.